So I may have told this story before, but I used to sit on the back deck with my dad, and we would just talk about life, talk about where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do, just baseball. It didn't matter, but I do remember that we would kind of talk about how much I had grown. Not him so much. I would talk about how much I had grown, and I just remember, I'd be in college and look back at who I was in high school and say, "Oh man, I was such an idiot back then." But then I would get out of college and we'd sit down again and I'd look back at who I was in college and say, "Oh man, I was such an idiot. I didn't know anything back then." And do the same thing a few years later, and this cycle would repeat itself. And then eventually, I just had this realization of like, maybe I just don't know anything. Maybe I'm just an idiot. And the reason I share that is we talked on Sunday about the idea of humility and the freedom that comes with knowing who we're not, that we're not called to be this, we're not called to be the one in charge. We're not called to be, we're not called to have this pressure on us. We're not called to be God. We're called to follow him and be subservient to him and just be faithful. But I think one of the things that's really important is to also understand that we are not some like ideal perfect version of ourselves that we tend to hold as a possibility that we just kind of keep kicking down the road where if only I could really get my stuff together, if only I could really have some time or get rid of some of these bad habits that I have or whatever. The reality is we're always going to be a work in progress. There's never going to come a time that we are perfect. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that we don't grow or change or develop. All through the times I was just talking about, I grew substantially. There's a reason I looked back and thought I didn't know anything. So hopefully we do grow, but there's always going to be this better version of ourselves out there. So it's easy to compare ourselves to that and say, oh, well, I'm not what I should be. I'm not, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, I'm not the person I should be, and I need to be better. And from a growth perspective, that's fine. But from a love perspective, it's so important for us to realize that God loves us where we are, that he meets us right where we're at, and there is no pressure. There is no comparison to who we might someday become. He loves us perfectly and truly where we are. And he has from the time we were born, from the time we were, from even before we come to him. I was 14 years old when I gave my life to Christ, and he loved me perfectly in that moment, even though I was an idiot. And then he's continued to love me perfectly through my mistakes and failings ever since. And yet we still sometimes trick ourselves into this comparison game of, once I get it figured out, then maybe. And God just doesn't treat us like that. And there's such a beautiful piece of humility in knowing that, and knowing that we're not that and we're never going to be that, and yet God loves us anyway. So I don't know who needs to hear that this morning. I hope it's not you, but if it is, I just want to encourage you that, whatever failings you have, God loves you perfectly and always has. Have a wonderful week.